All Saints' Day is taken from Luke in the 6th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Then Jesus looked up at his disciples and he said, Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who are hungry now, for you will be filled. Blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh. Blessed are you when people hate you, and when they exclude you, revile you, and defame you on the account of the Son of Man. Rejoice in that day and leap for joy, for surely your reward is great in heaven, for that is what the ancestors did to the prophets. But woe to you who are rich, for you have received your consolation. Woe to you who are full now, for you will be hungry. And woe to you who are laughing now, for you will mourn and weep. And woe to you when all speak well of you, for that is what their ancestors did to the false prophets. But I say to you that listen, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you, and bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from anyone who takes away your coat, do not withhold even your shirt. Give to everyone who begs from you. And if anyone takes away your goods, do not ask for them again. Do to others as you would have them do to you. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
This is kind of a special day for me because it was 5 years ago today that I was here supply preaching on All Saints' Day. And I remember on that day asking you to open up your worship hymnals in the beginning, and we looked at the commemoration days of the various people that the church remembers. It was kind of fun discovering some of these nameless people that are unknown to us, but who are kind of the harbingers of the past who bring faith forward to us. And after that service, Vince Riedinger, who was the council president, said, "You mind if we sit down and talk?" And after that, I kind of felt like the man who came to dinner because I never left. 5 years ago. And as I dig back into my memory, there are some things that are kind of special to me on All Saints' Day. And one of them was when I was going to college in D.C. at that time. And I remember going to Arlington Cemetery for the very first time. And if you've never been there and you go there for the first time, it kind of takes your breath away, doesn't it? The rolling hills, the crosses, that just seem to go on endlessly. And the nice thing about it was that I did it on All Saints' Day. It was the perfect time to be looking over all of these people who we honored as the defenders of our country. And I looked and wandered among several of the crosses of people of the First World War, Second World War, Korea, Vietnam, names, dates of birth, dates of death. And you can't help but wonder, this is who they are now, but they had lives. They lived them. And I'll never know about them. And then when I went off to Gettysburg Cemetery, I went over to the Gettysburg battlefields. It wasn't very far from our apartment, and I could walk out into the fields of Pickett's Charge. And back then, even 30 years ago, peaceful place, you would never have imagined what had happened on that battlefield, what Lee did in error, seeing it and saying, this is all my fault because so many people were killed. And then you go to the cemetery and you walk past grave after grave after grave, most of them being very young men, mostly all men as a matter of fact. And then moving down here, when Leslie and I decided we would go visit Hollywood Cemetery, and after visiting a northern battlefield, I now come to a southern one. And the names are very similar, the dates are very similar, two dates that are far too close together of being born and also dying. There is something to be said in the sobriety of seeing these places. These were living human beings, they breathed, they were alive. And I wondered about their lives, who never heard from the people that they sent off and never saw again. And I recalled once in class in seminary about one of my profs of homiletics, and we were talking about after you get ordained and people talk to you, and sometimes they have to come to you and talk about things they would never talk about to anybody else, and you understand that. And he said when they do that, He said, reserve your judgment. Reserve it carefully. You do not know what is in their hearts between them and only with God. And I think that is true for any of us. There is that inner self that somehow is not totally revealed to each other. And so when we come to All Saints' Day and we think about the people from our past, and in my past, I think also in yours, there are those people that you remember easily. And there are those other people that say, okay, time's up, kid. Nice that you're gone. My Aunt Pauline was always afraid of me because she liked me, but she would always come and she would pinch my cheek, and I hated it. I was trying to get away from her. I know she meant well, but it was always kind of an exercise of futility to try to dodge her, get into another room so she couldn't get a hold of me, because I knew what was coming. But I also remember that was the only part of her that I did remember. And she was the older sister of my father, and she favored my father because he was the youngest of the family. And always brought him home treats when he was a kid, loved him generously. And when she died, I sat next to my father. And during the funeral, I looked over at my father and had never seen him cry before. He wasn't crying loudly, just big tears, because he had memories that I didn't share. She was the one I ran from. She was the one who favored my father. And he loved her. He loved her very much. Now he was there to say goodbye. I think sometimes when we think about the people that we have lost in our lives, it is our ability within our own framework of being human beings that we only understand what we personally understand, very subjective. And I think that is something we have to be very careful about on All Saints' Day. Sure, in the book of commemorations and our hymnals, there are those people who made it into history. But for most of us, the people that we lose are not going to make it in history, even if it's only within our own selves that we remember. But even with that, we all know, even though we try to put it out of our minds, we're as mortal as those people who have gone before us, aren't we? It's not something that we dwell on all the time, except as you get older and you're smart enough, you put your house into order and you make sure you don't put a burden on your kids of having to clean out your attic or your cellar. And I have gone through that, and I loved my parents and I loved my in-laws, but I sure wish they had thought a little bit carefully before this all happened. But even at that, you see, even among those people, you could easily count their faults. But once again, that echoes back in my mind with that professor. Be careful to judge, because you do not know what is in the heart. You do not know what God knows, and how these people sometimes struggle, even though you don't see it. And they don't reveal it to you either. It's one of those things, you see, that can only be within the heart of God. And I think that is what we are called to celebrate. It is All Saints' Day. The church in its early 8th century made it a major feast day of the year. They clearly understood that the grand majority of the people are not going to be canonized. They're not going to be those people who are written in the history books. But nevertheless, they are the people that struggled. They are the people that brought up their children. And they didn't always do it right, but then you all became parents and you realized it wasn't so easy in the first place. But that is true for all people. For within everyone is a secret that only God knows. And only God knows how to forgive. And so today, when we celebrate All Saints' Day, and during the announcements, I'm going to invite you to take those cards. There should be pencils around you somewhere. Write down those names, and write them down as you would think God would want them to be, as you think God would like to treat them. As my Aunt Pauline, you see, who I always ran from, but then I discovered how much someone else loved her, so that I can remember her within God's presence, not to run away from her anymore, but in her glory, within the confines of the holy kingdom of God, that she is seen differently than I have seen her. My memory of her is not the same as God's. And God's memory of her is, I baptized you, you became mine. You are my kid now. And that is how we have to begin to see each other. I don't know how long each one of us is going to last within this community. You just never know. You may recall when I first came here, I was given the names of 5 people who were shadows to bring communion, which I did. And then 2 weeks later, each one of them died. And it got to the point where people were saying, if you don't feel good, don't invite Pastor to bring you communion. This could be a tragedy brought upon you. But I think it was wonderful and good, you see, that those names were given to me. Because even though they couldn't be here with us, they were part of what we call the communion of saints. Before they get to heaven, while they're still here, that we honor them. When the church can't be there for them, the church goes out to them and does what it has to do. Because you see, these are the people that we're going to live with. And this is what the kingdom of God is like. What we thought about each other, good or bad, pro or con, is erased. And what we see in each other is what God sees in each one of us. What God sees in the people you have lost. Visions that we could not possibly have here on earth. And that is what we're going to celebrate. I remember one story when I was at Gettysburg Seminary. The seminary had leased, I think, 2 acres of land to the YWCA for $1 for the next 100 years. And they built a wonderful complex there, including a wonderful Olympic-sized swimming pool. Now, I didn't realize it, but because Pennsylvania was right on the edge of Maryland, because that was the kind of the line between North and South during the Civil War, and neither did I realize that there were still some people fighting the Civil War. Surprise, surprise. And when the town gathered to hear what the Y wanted to do, there were some of those people who were waving Southern flags. Only they were visible. I didn't know it at the time. I wanted to go just to see what it was like. And they were worried, you see, that with the influx of black populations in and around Gettysburg, that the Y would also offer these swimming pools to all people, including blacks. Now, they were very careful to couch their words about it because they did not want to be seen as racist, but you knew just by the way they were talking. Now, the wonderful part is my wonderful teacher of actually systematic theology, Robert Jensen, was there. And Robert Jensen would always come with an invisible loaded Uzi. He was ready for this type of thing. And so when one of these men stood up and in couched terms wanted it to be known that this pool would be somewhat restricted, if you know what I mean. And Jensen stood up and said to the man, "Sir, may I be so bold to ask you what religious faith you practice?" The man said, "I am a Presbyterian." He could have been Lutheran, really. And he said, "Well, you know, I'm getting the feeling that you have some reservations about this pool." And he said, "Well, I do." And he said, could it possibly be about some particular race of people? And the man went silent, because he didn't want to say it, of course. And Jensen said, "Well, let me ask you, sir, as a good Presbyterian, and I know you are, is it your hope that when you die, God will bring you into his kingdom?" And he said, "I live in that assurance." Well, he said, "Would you agree that if you looked up on some research that you looked upon the population of the earth, that as you look at all the different races, that you and me as white people, we're not the predominant color, are we?" And the man said, "I suppose not." And he said, "Well, sir, I don't understand why you're so anxious to get into the kingdom of God where you're going to live with those people forever." You see, that type of thing always is overcome by what we call the gospel. And the gospel wipes away all of those things. It wipes away the whole concept of racism, of sexism. It wipes away even the hidden anger that we might have had of people that we have lost in our lives. And it opens to us the possibility that there is a love and compassion that goes beyond anything we thought could be. By God, if there's anything to celebrate on All Saints' Day, it is that. And so today, when you write out your cards, just don't do it for the people who were grand and wonderful to you. Do it for the people that maybe you didn't understand. Do it for Aunt Maud, you see, who had a somewhat difficult temper, or anyone else you think to yourself, maybe I didn't know their heart as well as God did, and as God does. And when you walk out of here after you've given your card and you pick up that carnation and you bring it home, put it in a visible part of your house. When you walk by it, it will remind you that, as is said in the Old Testament by God, My ways are not your ways, nor are my thoughts your thoughts. For just as the heavens are higher than the earth, my ways are above your ways, my thoughts are above your thoughts. Alleluia on All Saints' Day, for God who triumphs, who gives freely, perhaps what they could not, or even we, as we sit here, are still struggling to do. Let All Saints' Day bring us together in what we proclaim, creeds, I believe in the communion of saints.